Welcome to the podcast From the Alps to the Rockies. It's part of the celebration of 75 years of diplomatic relations between Switzerland and Canada. The Swiss Embassy in Ottawa and the Consulates General in Montreal and Vancouver are pleased to offer you a series of podcasts between July 1st and August 1st, the respective national days of the two countries. The broadcasts will feature speakers from Switzerland and Canada who will discuss various aspects of collaboration from the Swiss Alps to the Canadian Rockies.
Hello, my name is Sarah Bagdasarians at the General Consulate of Switzerland in Montreal. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to Elizabeth Semmelhack at the Bata Shoe Museum in Toronto. Good day, Elizabeth. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Semmelhack, as you said, and I am the creative director and the senior curator of the Bata Shoe Museum in Toronto, Canada. And I have been at the museum since 2000, so 20 years now. I've only been the creative director for 1 year.
And what do you do at the Bata Shoe Museum? We're talking shoes, I suppose.
Well, it does seem obvious, right, that I would be doing shoes. But I think the reason why I have lasted as long at the museum as I have is because footwear is a really fascinating way to enter into larger cultural questions and moments. And so when I first arrived at the museum, I had my background was in Japanese art history. It had nothing to do with footwear. And yet I realized that a lot of the things that I had been asking of Japanese prints, which was my academic focus, these were mass-produced items that were part of popular culture. And I could, through looking at Japanese prints, because they were mass-consumed, take the pulse of any given moment in the Edo period that I was studying. And I realized when I pivoted to shoes that a lot of the same approaches were applicable. Shoes are mass-produced. And things that are mass-produced and then are mass-consumed mean that they appeal to a huge number of people, which means that you can take the pulse of a moment by looking at those consumables. So footwear came for me a really, really fascinating way to start asking questions. And I cannot believe it, but 20 years later, I still have tons of questions to ask. So in terms of what I do at the museum, I do a lot of research. Everything pretty much is primary research. And so I put on exhibitions, I write books, I write exhibition text, I give interviews. And then as a creative director, I am responsible for the overall sort of operation of the museum and its vision moving forward. And so let's just say that there's a lot to do.
That's fantastic. And since we're on a Swiss podcast,
correct.
I'm wondering, what is the Swiss contribution to the Bata Shoe Museum? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. So our founder, Mrs. Sonja Bata, she actually grew up in Zurich. She is a Swiss native, and she married into the Bata family. She married Mr. Bata, but she was Swiss, and so she brought with her, maybe a few stereotypically Swiss things. We had a tight schedule to keep, and we also, although the collection is very, very wide-ranging, we have footwear from around the world and throughout history. We also have a healthy number of Swiss pieces, dating from the 16th century all the way up to Roger Federer and his sneakers. So the Swiss have a strong representation. So not only do we have a Swiss founder, but we have Swiss objects in our collection.
And could you tell us why she chose to found a museum? On the top, I think I recall that they moved to Canada and also founded a city where to make shoes. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. So what had happened was the Bata company, prior to World War II, was one of the largest producers of footwear in the world. And so it was one of the first countries to be focused on by the Germans because they wanted to get the capabilities of making footwear. In fact, many wars have been won because of shoes. If you cannot shod your soldiers, you can actually not win the war. And so Mr. Bata, he was a young man at the time, he was able to leave the country, bring with him 100 Czech families, and they relocated here to Canada. And he purchased this a beautiful parcel of land that reminded him of home. And so he set up a sort of satellite at a company while the main company was being taken over by the Germans. And so he wanted to be making footwear, but instead he began to work for the Allies, and he enlisted in the Canadian military. And instead of producing shoes, they produced other things that the Canadian Armed Forces needed. And so this beautiful stretch of land where he was hoping to establish the company, it sort of had a different focus when World War II broke out. But he did decide to name it Ottawa. And the reason he named it Ottawa is that wherever Bata companies go, they often will make a company town in that area, and they will often name it with a suffix. A suffix that is relates to the language of the country that they're operating within. And so he saw Ottawa. So the town that he established was Ottawa. Now, Mrs. Bata wasn't in the picture yet. She actually didn't marry him until the end of the war, till 1946. So she had been in Switzerland throughout the war period and moved to Canada to be with her new husband in 1946. And they did establish a home in Ottawa. They had other residences, other places as well. But she instantly became interested in being a part of the company. And 1946, there weren't a lot of women who were in business. And Mr. Bata was open to her participation, and she insisted on traveling with him wherever he went around the world. And it was on those trips that she began to make the very astute observation that people's feet are basically the same no matter where you go around the world. But what people have traditionally put on their feet expresses a wide range of cultural nuance. It can be everything from the climate one lives in to how one society expresses gender or status. And so she began to collect examples of this footwear. First off, she thought that maybe she could give it to Bata designers and that they could be inspired by local traditions and alter the designs of the shoes that they were making for specific markets. In fact, that wasn't the case. Most people in other parts of the world who wanted to buy Bata shoes wanted to buy them because they looked like Western shoes. And so she ended up with this collection of footwear from around the world. And I think that that's when the collecting bug bit. And so she started to collect earnestly and began to look beyond contemporary footwear to look at historic objects as well. And so before she knew it, we had a pretty sizable collection, and her first curator, Alika Weber, said to her, "You actually should make a museum." And so she decided to find the perfect place in downtown Toronto. It had been the site of a former gas station. They're right at the edge of University of Toronto. And she hired Raymond Moriyama, an esteemed Canadian architect, and he designed for her a building that looks like a very modern interpretation of a shoebox with the lid. The roof is sort of the lid just askew, suggesting that the box is open. Come on in.
Fantastic. You talked about Sonja and her legacy that she's passing on and that you're taking care of. You also talked about what quality she brought to the museum as time management. Mm-hmm. Are there other things that she insisted or she asked to be put on and that you would view as a Swiss quality, let's say?
um, one of the things that has been a very longstanding blessing, having had the opportunity to work with her, is that she was always very generous with the museum. Again, not to be too stereotypical, there was concern with finances, and that very good management has left us in a healthy position so that we can move forward and really see her vision grow. And certainly, she kept a house in Saint Moritz, and whenever she would go home to her winter house, she would always make sure to visit local dealers. She had a number of Swiss dealers who were very important to her and who kept their eyes open for good material. And that is where a lot of our works on paper come from. So, for example, one of the strengths of the collection is our gild material. So, prior to industrialization, shoemakers throughout Europe had important guilds, and they had processes by which one became a shoemaker, an apprentice, a journeyman, and then a full-fledged shoemaker. And then once you were accepted as a shoemaker, you were part of the shoemaking guild. And so we have apprenticeship letters from Switzerland. We have guild cups where they would drink celebrations. These beautiful guild cups, many of them are Swiss. And so she was always very interested in making sure that that Swiss history was a part of our collection here in Toronto. We also have a very, very healthy collection of ballet shoes.
Great.
And so, ballet is a very long-standing Swiss brand producing extremely high quality footwear. And in fact, the exhibition that we're just taking out, it was called Want, Design, Desire, and Depression Era Footwear. And Bali was making some of the most beautiful footwear in the 1930s, and we were able to showcase quite a few pieces in that exhibition. And so, yes, we have lots of Swiss material.
Talking about the collection, I remember your vault. And
yes.
If you could tell us a bit more about how many shoes you have and how the collection is still growing.
So, one of the things that I love to do, and I was so happy to do it with you, is to bring people down into the vaults, into storage. Because I think people, when you visit the museum hopefully is very impressive. And you see, we have 3 temporary exhibitions. We have this big permanent exhibition. But that isn't all we have. We have a storage of footwear from which I can pull shoes to do exhibitions, and I love taking people downstairs so they can get a sense of just how big the collection really is. So Mrs. Bata was able to accomplish in one lifetime truly a magnificent collection of footwear. And so now that I'm creative director, I too want to continue to build the collection, and growing the collection I think is vital. So at the moment, we have 14,700 objects. A single artifact can be a pair of shoes, it can be a pair of stockings, but it can also be a set of shoemaker's tools. Or, for example, for Mrs. Bata's 80th birthday, Mr. Bata asked me if I could help him get her a birthday gift. And one component of that gift was 63 original drawings by the French shoe designer Roger Vivier. Those are one artifact. So even for me, I think 14,700 objects seems immense, but many of those artifacts represent multiple objects. So we really have a very large collection, and we are now continuing to grow it.
And what also impressed me is the multiculturalism of the collection. Shoes from all over the places, you name it, you have it. And any kind of era as well.
Correct. So the oldest piece in the collection is 4,500 years old. It is a pair of ancient Egyptian footwear that was made specifically to be put into a grave site. As you know, ancient Egyptians believed that you needed to take it with you when you went so that you had it in the next world. So shoes, being a very important part of our lives, were also deemed to be important in the afterlife. And the most contemporary piece might be a pair of Air Force One Nike Reimagined Nike had a bunch of women designers, female designers, come together to reimagine iconic Nike shoes. And they donated that, I think, in a couple of years ago. And we have many, many more shoes coming in, but that's, I think, maybe the most contemporary in terms of date. And so the collection ranges in date from antiquity to today. And then we do, as you mentioned, have footwear from around the world. I think one of the things that I find most interesting about shoes is that pretty much everybody has always worn shoes, and they have always worn them around the world. And so Mrs. Bata had made it her goal, make sure that the museum was as wide-ranging in its collection as it could be.
And we are celebrating this year the 75th anniversary of Canadian-Swiss diplomacy relations. Mm-hmm. And Bata is also celebrating this year. Tell us about that. Yeah.
So the museum opened 25 years ago in May. So we just celebrated our 25th anniversary. And making a museum, sustaining a museum, having that museum gain worldwide recognition, that is, I think, quite an accomplishment. And I think it does speak to both Mrs. Bata as a person, but also to the boldness of daring to make a museum focused on shoes. And so over that 25 years, I think we've gone from being a museum where people questioned, what? A museum about shoes? To, oh, you have to go see that museum, and that we are hopefully understood to be a center of footwear and fashion research. So I'm very pleased to be leading the museum in this 25th year. And we do have a brand new book that came out. It's called The World at Your Feet. And it is a celebration of the collection. And it is really the first coffee table book that we've ever made. It's gorgeous and gives you just a little glimpse into what makes the collection so spectacular.
Great. Could you tell us about your next exhibition when you reopen, and what's coming up?
Sure. So I had a very ambitious schedule prior to COVID hitting, and we've been able to maintain some of that schedule. We were hoping to do 2 exhibitions this year. The second exhibition we've pushed into 2021, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But the main exhibition that we're opening this year is called The Great Divide, Footwear and the Age of Enlightenment. And what it does is, and it turns out to be very topical because it asks how Enlightenment thinking in the 18th century began to rationalize colonialism and imperialism, and how it established certain or reinforced certain binaries such as race and gender to help accomplish those goals. And how did fashion, in fact, support these new ideas? And believe it or not, footwear really becomes sort of a feature of this new way of looking at the world. And so the exhibition looks at everything from privilege and power to colonialization and slavery, and shows all of these footwear-related artifacts tell this story. And then in the center of the exhibition is a very modern, hyper-modern space in which I've put footwear from today. And I'm asking the question, how tethered are we to these 18th century concepts? Is it perhaps possible, or is it time to maybe leave some of those ideas in the past? And can we begin to see this change in the footwear choices that we make? So that exhibition is going to open up in August, and will be up for the remainder. Well, it'll be up for 18 months. And the second exhibition that we were hoping to open in September, which has been pushed to next May, is called Exhibit A, Investigating Crime in Footwear. And that exhibition actually has a Swiss connection because there are a number of reasons, but one is that we're borrowing some artifacts from a museum in Switzerland that's devoted to crime. And one of the pieces, it's going to be, I think, a crowd favorite, is a pair of espadrilles that was used by a cat burglar who took the rope of the sole of the espadrille and unwound it and used it as an escape rope. from when he committed his crimes. And the other thing, too, is that at the University of Lausanne, there is the world's specialist in footwear forensics. And the exhibition should be really very interesting, particularly given what's been happening in the world today. But we're able to borrow from Scotland Yard, and we have a number of pieces in our own museum. So I think that that will be a really interesting exhibit, too.
Yes, indeed. It looks very interesting, and we're looking forward to it. But tell our listener how we can keep in touch with you and the Bata Shoe Museum. So for the next exhibit, or when we come to Toronto, if we don't live there.
Yes. So absolutely. I do think that probably for the next little while, the majority of people will interact with us online. And so everybody should visit our museum website, which is www.batashoemuseum, all one word, .ca for Canada. And we are also active on all the social media outlets. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We're putting up blogs. We're finding, I think, hopefully interesting ways of engaging with the public and offering insights into our collection online during this time. So there's lots of opportunities to learn about us and learn about what we do and what we have in the collection by just simply following us on social media.
Well, Elizabeth, I thank you very, very much for your insight, for your sharing about the Bata Shoe Museum and its Swissness. And to you, dear listener, I hope you enjoyed this moment, and I thank you for your attention. Until next time, have a great day.